Title of this lecture is Mesenteries, Large Intestine, and Liver Support, Absorb, and well, pretty much everything else. So we're going to cover the rest of the digestive system in this lecture here. So buckle up. In this next slide, it's called Keeping It Together. The reason is because there is a specific type of tissue that I want to talk about, and it is a connective tissue that surrounds everything. It's called peritoneum. Now, the name of this particular type of connective tissue changes depending on what it's surrounding. For example, when it surrounds the heart, it's called pericardium, because cardia means heart. When it surrounds bone, periosteum. When it surrounds muscle, perimysium, whatever. It changes its name, but still, either way, it's still peritoneum. I refer to it as kind of being like laminating. I think back to grade school, and a lot of things that you see were laminated. Different cutouts, and in my head right now I'm thinking of like an apple. For some reason, every elementary school classroom has to have a laminated apple somewhere in the room. And you don't see a whole lot of laminating in the upper grades, and I think it's because little kids produce a lot of fluids. Vomit and snot and sweat and pee and all that kind of stuff, and so as a result, teachers try to protect their documents from year to year, so they have to protect them from the fluids of the children, so they surround them with plastic and call it lamination. Well, we're not so much worried inside of the body with little kids puking on your guts. That'd be really just weird, to be honest with you. But the reason we do that is because we have to protect each individual organ to separate it out and to protect the structures and blood vessels that are going to and from it. Now, if we take two layers, and this stuff it's seriously a lot like that because it's thin and it's clear and it's tough, this peritoneum. If we take two layers of it and we sandwich blood vessels, like we take blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatics, and like kind of squeeze them in between a couple of these things, and it's almost like lamination, then we call that a mesentery. And your intestines have mesenteries that are leading to and from them because you have lots of little blood vessels and lots of nerves and lots of lymphatic structures that are going into the intestine. And if you think about how much your body gets jolted and jostled in a day, if you jump up and down, your intestines go up and down with you. But if there wasn't some sort of supporting structure to keep all those things together and intact and help kind of organize and protect those things, those vessels could easily rip and you'd have internal bleeding. So mesenteries are good like that. Now, on Oprah, there's been a lot of talk about the omentum as Dr. Oz. I watch Oprah sometimes. When Dr. Oz is on, I watch Oprah. A mesentery, a special mesentery that you have, as you can see, if you flip to the next slide with the mesenteries and omentum at the top, you can see there's like a big, thick mesentery that kind of folds over all of your intestines. It attaches to the greater curvature of the stomach, and it's kind of like a big, fat blanket that's just covering all your structures here. There's a lot of different purposes for that. There's lots of fat storage in here, and there's lymphatics and things like that go through. But sometimes that omentum can get packed full of fat if we eat too many fatty foods and things like that. Right above that, I've got a picture of a mesentery, so you can see this is actually the mesenteries inside of a rat, but you get the whole idea, that there's these thin layers that kind of help protect and organize these blood vessels and things. Alright, flip to the next slide, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the anatomy of the large intestine. It goes up, over, down, back, and out. Up, over, down, back, out. Okay. Up, the part that rises up, if we start at the very bottom, it'll be the patient's right. So the bottom there, you'll see kind of a little pouch there. That's called the cecum. The cecum is what receives the digested food from the ileum. Remember the ileum, you can see the little tube going in there. The ileum is the last section of the small intestine. And there's a sphincter there that regulates what actually passes and what stays behind, called the ileocecal valve. And when that opens, materials from the ileum get dumped in there. Now, dangling off the bottom of that thing is the vermiform appendix. Vermiform is a fancy word that means worm-like. And this is considered a vestigial structure. because it really doesn't have a purpose in the body right now. The only thing it can do is mess you up. What it does is sometimes this thing will, it's like a little tube sock that hangs off there, and sometimes if the tissue gets infected, it can open up, and it's called an appendix bursting. If it gets swollen, that's called, oh come on, you know this, inflammation of the appendix. There you go, appendicitis. All right. So if this thing bursts, it can release bacteria and other bad things into the lumen of the body, which is the open space, and that's supposed to be sterile. So you can get a condition called sepsis, which is really, really bad. All right, so materials go in there, and then there's all these little pouches here that called haustra of the intestines that allow for expansion. There's also a band of muscle that runs kind of lengthwise all the way down the middle of it called the tinea coli. So the materials are going to go up. They're going to switch over and go across at the right colic flexure, otherwise called the hepatic flexure. The reason it's called hepatic is because hepa means liver. Someone has inflammation of the liver, it's called hepatitis. And this one is the closest to the liver, so it's the hepatic flexure. So then we go across the body at the transverse colon, and then we're going to make another flip and head back down. On the left side, there's the splenic flexure, and I'm sure you can probably figure out exactly why that is, as it's right by the spleen. Then we head down the descending colon. We went up the ascending on the other side. Now we're going down the descending colon. And we make another turn at the sigmoid flexure. I'm not exactly sure why this is called the sigmoid colon. Some anatomists thought at one point this looked like the Greek letter sigma, but I ain't seeing it, man. So it turns at the sigmoid flexure and then goes across the sigmoid colon, and the last part is the rectum. Rectum. Darn near killed him. Sorry. Anyway, rectum is the last 8 to 10 centimeters of the intestines here, and that's where materials will gather before they are escorted out of the body, I guess you could say, or rejected as feces. And the reason you have the urge that you need to poo is because your rectum fills with materials, and as it fills, there's stretch receptors in there that respond to that stretching and tell you, hey, man, we got to go, so let's do this thing. So let's flip to the next slide, and you'll see the histology of the intestine. First of all, the word histology, since it ends with ology, you know it's a study of. And hista is referring to tissue, so we're studying the tissue of the large intestine. Comparison to that of the small intestine, the large intestine doesn't have any villi, so it has significantly less surface area for absorption. There's an abundance of goblet cells, which, as we all know, make mucus. There are distinct intestinal glands here that just kind of go deep down in there. They're lined with all these cells. And the mucosa doesn't produce enzymes. Now, logically, I'd ask the question, are there enzymes in the large intestine? And you should answer yes. Because even though the large intestine, the mucosa doesn't produce them, we have enzymes from two different sources. One, there are bacteria that live in here that are producing lots and lots of enzymes trying to break down the food for themselves, and we benefit from that. The other thing is that you have intestines that came from further up the digestive tract, small intestines, even some from the stomach, but they might not be as effective with this change in pH. If we go to the next slide, oh wait, we can go back for just a second. You can see that the musculature is the same as the stomach. We have the mucosa, the submucosa, we have the different layers of muscle, longitudinal, oblique, and circular, and then the serosa on the outside. It's almost identical. Okay, absorption in the large intestine is the next slide, number 6. And if roughly 1,500 mils of digestive material enter the colon, about 200 will be rejected as feces. So therefore, about 1,300 mils will be absorbed. Most of that is water. There's a lot of water absorbed here. Vitamins are absorbed here, bile salts are absorbed here, and unfortunately toxins are absorbed here too, because, you know, and to a large degree your colon doesn't know the difference, so it's just absorbing what it can, and sometimes that's bad stuff. Flip to the next slide, you'll see that bacteria break down peptides and make different stinky compounds. Ammonia, which you all know what that smells like, it's a household cleaner. Indole, scatol, those are both named after poo, and then hydrogen sulfide, that's a rotten egg smell. Bacteria are really an important part of your digestion, though, because they produce enzymes that we can't produce, and they're able to break down substance that we can't, and they liberate vitamins and so on and so forth. Go on to the next slide. Composition of fecal waste. Even though it's solid, 75% of it is water, which is kind of hard to believe, but it is. 20% is indigestible material, fiber, inorganic matter, and epithelial cells that you shed from the contact. Now this is the alarming statistic, but it happens all the time. 5% by mass of your fecal waste is pure bacteria. Now if you consider how small a bacterial cell is, that is a lot of bacteria. Inevitably, when I talk about this, people want to know about gas. So flatus is the technical term for gas that is passed through the anus as a result of flatulence. There are two main sources for this gas. One is that bacteria break down protein and complex carbohydrates and produce this gas. And the other is from swallowed air. If you eat too quickly, you're going to have more gas than people who eat more slowly because you're going to swallow more air. The next slide shows that there are two extremes to feces. One is dry, hard feces, and one is a watery bowel movement. Constipation, obviously, is the dry, hard feces, caused by infrequent defecation, to which there could be a number of sources. But here's the thing. The intestine only knows to absorb. So the longer that material sits in that intestine, the more water and the more nutrients and things like that are going to be absorbed from it. Therefore, the harder it's going to become and the larger it's going to become. If someone is inactive, they're not drinking a lot of fluids, they're not getting exercise, those are all things that can contribute to constipation. And it is more common as we age. Older people are more likely to be constipated, and women are more likely to be constipated than men. So the worst combination would probably be an older woman who doesn't ever drink water and doesn't work out and doesn't get fiber. That would be bad for a lot of reasons, but definitely constipated. Diarrhea, for whatever reason, intestinal mucosa are not able to maintain normal levels of absorption. And I realize that I'm not exactly hitting the nail on the head here explaining that to you, but the reason I'm being so vague is there's a ton of different things that can cause this. Bacteria can, viruses can cause it, protozoa can cause it, chemical things can cause it. That's what a laxative is a chemical that freaks out your mucosa so it can't absorb. The next slide, liver. You need this organ to live. That's why we call it a liver. Thank you. Thank you very much. Simply stated, the liver does everything else. If you consider all the things that your body does and all the things the other organs do, the liver does everything else. You can make a list of hundreds and hundreds of things that the liver actually performs. But I could break it down into three main categories of function: bile production, metabolic regulation, and hematological regulation. But that still doesn't narrow it down a whole lot. My job is that I do everything in the world. Okay, well that's a pretty, though you explained it, it's not very specific. So in the next slide I'll try to hammer that out. Basically it helps to metabolize everything, keep the blood in perfect condition, and also produces bile. Another interesting statistic is that the liver receives about 25% of your body's blood at one time. So if you take all the blood in your body, 25% of it hangs out in the liver all the time. This next slide, here's what is meant by regulation. In metabolic regulation, this helps you to break down carbohydrates, helps you to break down lipids, helps you to break down amino acids, helps to remove waste products from different places, and helps to break those things down, helps to store vitamins, helps to store minerals, and it helps to inactivate drugs. One of the main things that we have to consider when prescribing medication is that your body metabolizes these things at different rates. That's why it says Tylenol, you're supposed to take whatever the dosage is every 4 to 6 hours, because that's how long it takes for your liver to break down acetaminophen, which is the chemical that's in Tylenol. So at that point it's metabolized, all of it, and you can dose yourself again with some more to put it back in your bloodstream. So this is really tricky to consider how long it takes to actually process these things. Next is hematological regulation. Well, hemato, like hematocrit, like red blood cell, like blood, I guess. First, we have phagocytosis and antigen presentation. That means that your body will eat stuff that your liver will eat things that are not supposed to be there, and it puts antigens in to the bloodstream. Synthesis of plasma proteins. Remember, 7% of your plasma as a whole is made of plasma proteins. All those are made here. Removal of circulating hormones, removal of antibodies, storage of toxins or removal of toxins. Now, what do I mean by storage? Here's where the liver really takes one for the team. For example, if you've ingested something like mercury, which I don't recommend, you can't break that down because mercury is an element, and unless you are a nuclear reactor, you can't break down elements. So your body doesn't know what to do, and it can't get rid of it. So what does the liver do? The liver packs it away and keeps it from harming all the other stuff. So it really takes one for the team there. Finally, synthesis and secretion of bile. Now, bile is important. We're going to talk about it after this next slide. I'm just going to show you a picture of the liver here. One is a cartoon, and one is an actual liver. Huge organ, just enormous. Another interesting statistic is that you can actually donate half of your liver to somebody who needs a liver. And in a year, you will both have a complete, full-sized, fully functioning liver. It is an amazing organ. But it can't make something out of nothing, though, so take good care of your liver. In other words, don't drink or do drugs. Next, if you look at this picture, I'm still looking at the picture of the liver here. You can see it's divided into the right lobe and left lobe. The right is larger. There is a major vein. If you see that, the inferior vena cava runs through it. There's also a hepatic portal vein that goes through the liver. That's really important. And you can see that on the underside of the liver is this little sac called the gallbladder. Go to the next slide. Another bladder, the gall of this structure. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of my element here. Under the liver, you can see that little thing, little sac there. The liver makes the bile. I want to make that distinction because the gallbladder really doesn't have a capacity for generating bile. But it does store the bile that is produced. So the gallbladder is responsible for storage of bile and modification of bile. It helps to concentrate the bile and take some of the water out. Sometimes they get blocked. Now this is an interesting thing. A lot of people have gallstones, but they'll never know. Because if your gallstone is large enough that it stays inside of the gallbladder, you'll never experience any problems. But if it's small enough to get trapped in one of those little bile ducts that help to put that out into the duodenum, then you've got major pain and major problems. If somebody continues to have these, oftentimes they'll remove the gallbladder and just pipe whatever the liver secretes directly into the small intestine, because the liver is still producing bile. But it's better to have a gallbladder, but it's better to have, no pain than searing pain than it is to have a gallbladder if it's continually a problem. Now the way that bile works is it emulsifies fats. If you remember from putting Crisco on our hands in class, that fats are non-polar, therefore they don't mix with water, which is a problem because most of the stuff that we have in the bloodstream and all that kind of stuff like that is mostly polar. So we have to figure out a way for fats to be able to make it in there. So bile is kind of like soap, and that's a little bit simple of an analogy. If you look at the molecule itself, it's kind of like a phospholipid. One end of it is polar, and the other end is nonpolar. So what it can do is take its nonpolar end and completely surround a fat so it can move into a polar environment. And that's what's meant by the process of emulsification. Okay, and I think that's just about it. So if you have any questions, I would post those to the forum under general discussion in Exam 4, Unit 4. Thank you.